How's it going, guys? It's Nutshell, and today we are going to be doing a tier list of the PvE maps. Which ones are the best for loot, for generally just playing on, and of course this is my opinion and should not be taken as specific fact. I'm just going to detail my experience with playing all of these different maps, how much money we typically make, and the difficulty level of the map as well for the majority of players, so that you guys understand which are the best ones to go ahead and loot up if you do want to make some money or simply just want to have the most fun when playing PvE Tarkov. So with that underway, let's start off with, of course, Lab. So the Lab is, of course, one of the best maps, period, for getting yourself some of the gear, for being able to pick up some of the rarest loots in the game. Lots of loot that is required from labs is actually going to be needed for your hideout, so the lab specific hideout items are going to spawn on labs. However, difficulty level for labs is slightly higher than a lot of the others because you will have to meet both raiders and of course PMCs when you are playing labs. No scavs does make it slightly better to be able to go around and loot. The only problem is you will be running into PMC and they are quite aggressive on the map. But once you get past that kind of fear factor of first jumping into labs and playing it and giving it a go, it really is one of the best maps for sure, and that's why I think there is no other place but it is an S tier map. This map is one of the best. You can easily make anywhere from 3 million plus, and of course if you have some of the key cards which are actually reasonably priced now, you can make an absolute fortune from just running this map entirely. And of course, there's a lot of items, things like stims, which you can just stock up on just by playing the map, and all you really need is a black keycard. So realistically, the best map, I think, in my opinion, for getting yourself a wide variety of items, rare loot, and also getting yourself rubles as well. The next map then is, of course, Lighthouse. Now, Lighthouse is a bit of an interesting one because as a newer player, it's actually one of the best runs that you can do because you can essentially loot up the chalets, which is ultimately just free to be able to loot. There's a ton of ammo spawns that actually spawn on Lighthouse, so a very good way for if you've just started playing Escape from Tarkov's PvE mode to farm up ammunition. They are lying absolutely everywhere throughout both of the chalets that you actually come across, and pretty much that run in its entirety, it makes you millions per raid, especially if you're managing to get armor repair kits. We've done multiple videos on Lighthouse chalet runs, and so that works really, really well. But as a entire map and the excitement factor that comes with playing Lighthouse, it's probably on the lower end, at least if you aren't trying to push into the kind of, I guess, rogue base, which is one of the key fun bits about actually playing Lighthouse, and it is a challenge, which is something that I think is good. But at the end of the day, when you are playing as an individual player and trying to play Lighthouse, and ultimately you versus every single one of the rogues, and there's no help really from any other PMCs, it can be a bit frustrating to play the map and try and complete tasks, which is definitely going to bring it down in terms of the quality of the map in general. But I'm interested to see what you guys think. But I think for me, the map, a very solid one to be able to loot up and get rare loot, should you want to just do that. But as a map for just the pure enjoyment, I think it isn't quite there, and hence why I think it's a solid B and will probably be on the verge between B and A. I think the map itself is a really good one. It just could be slightly better on PvE if the PMCs did actually help you out a little bit more with the rogues. But either way, you can still do it depending on your skill level. It's just much harder if you're newer to Tarkov, for example. Now, the next one, Reserve. Now, Reserve is probably one of my favourite maps for sure, and this one is because not only is there some really good engagements that you can have, the bosses, the boss, which is Glukar, is actually a really fun one to try and fight. It's quite a difficult fight. There's lots of kind of guards that spawn with him, And there's also some rogues or raiders that you can actually meet on the map as well. Obviously down in the bunker, there's lots of PMC fighting that you can come across. The loot on the map is really good. And in terms of variety of different like combat engagements you can go with, you know, you could be more tactical, you could go for the sniping approach where you sit on top of the radar tower and have a bit more of a chilled out time, or you can go all guns blazing down into the bunker and try and deal with PMCs that way. And I think for me, it is just like the perfect map for fun in terms of the engagements that you're going to have. Labs is very good for the loot and probably slightly better than Reserve, but if you are playing Reserve for loot, it is one of the best maps as well. It's probably the second or third best map, very closely tied, of course, with the Lab and one other map that we'll be featuring later on. But in terms of Reserve, where is it going to place? I think it is probably A tier. I think for the majority of people, it can be a bit difficult if you're trying to run down into the basement area. But the loot is amazing, the engagements are really fun, and I think it is a very good map. Lots of marked rooms that you can hit up if you want to as extra content to the map. So yeah, definitely a very good one for PvE. The next one is Shoreline. So Shoreline is one of these maps that is obviously quite good for loot. There's lots of different loot locations on Shoreline where you can go and try out different runs. The only real problem with Shoreline is, of course, it does get the goons. The goons do spawn on the map, like Lighthouse, which can be really frustrating, especially, for example, on Shoreline, because of the fact that they do spawn in a pretty annoying location, which is on top of the radar tower, or at least like the radio antenna station. And so when they do spawn there, you can immediately just get lit up from the beginning of a spawn sometimes. They can also just push you when you're trying to extract, and so they are annoying to play on Shoreline, and it's quite difficult to actually get up the radar tower to be able to actually take them out if you are trying to. So it's one of the least useful maps in terms of trying to take out the goons for any tasks or anything that you might have to complete, as well as them just being annoying when they do actually spawn on the map. But obviously if you've got experience taking out the goons, that's not a problem. However, what the problem Shoreline has is that the extracts are quite far spread apart. It's not absolutely terrible, and provided that you're at the health resort at the end location when you just before you extract, there's plenty of extracts that are close to you, especially if you have the Red Rebel extract. But the problem is once again, the map is so big and the loot density on the map is pretty compact into a wide variety of different spots, which means you're having to run a lot on Shoreline, making it very difficult to easily farm up loot in a short period of time. The health resort is an amazing spot to actually go and pick up loot, but even then there's a limited amount of rare loot spawns that don't require you to just have some of the best keys for the actual map itself, and so it can be quite a confusing map to try and learn as a new player, as there's lots of keys and doors that are just not really useful, but then there's some amazing ones to try and open, and I'd highly recommend checking out the actual Shoreline video that we did on the best keys for the map. I will link it in the description down below for you to go and have a look at if you want to have a look at a kind of run that you can do. But overall, kind of the map is not my favourite. It's probably on the lower end because of the fact that it is just so big, and it does feel quite clunky to play sometimes with those goons, and just it's not my favourite map. It's so big and open, and there's lots of dull periods where you haven't got a huge amount of engagements, and although some people might enjoy that, a bit more of a slow pace engagement fighting where you can ramp it up when you go into the health resort, just don't really find it too engaging, and the loot is definitely not as good per time spent in every single one of your raids. So it's going to be a C tier. I don't think it's particularly the best for PvE. On PvP, for example, it's really good because there's lots of engagement that happens at the health resort, but PvE, there's only so many PMC spawns that actually spawn at the health resort, so it can be like 5 people that you take out of the health resort maximum, and then it's just boring from then on in. The next map then is Streets of Tarkov. Now this is one of the best maps in the game, and I think we can instantly put it in S tier. This is genuinely probably up there with Labs in terms of the quality of the loot, But there are some limitations with the map, primarily based on your hardware. So if you've got an older PC, if you haven't spent a stupid amount of money on a PC like I have, then running the map on PvE can be quite bad, and even if you do run it on a solo, if you are running it, it's still on the servers, so it takes a little bit better performance than some of the other maps that you might try and play. Streets, however, is known for being terribly optimized for a lot of people, so it can be basically down to the computer that you have whether or not you can run this map on PvE. So yeah, I mean, same for PvP, but ideally, if you can, you want to be running Streets. It is one of the best maps. It has a huge amount of loot. There are crazy amounts of spawns, and there are some absolutely top quality kind of loot locations. We've done many videos showcasing off a few different runs that you can do on Streets. You have, for example, the Rusted Key run, you have the Relaxation Room Key spawn and opening in one run. You've also then got a ton of kind of computer spawns that you can go and check for graphics cards. You have areas for medical items where you can go and pick up LEDXs. There is just an infinite number of routes that you can take on this map, and the PMC engagements alongside some of the bosses make it one of the best kind of overall maps in my opinion, because of the fact that you just have so many different things that you can do. Not every single one of the Streets raids is the same, and much in a complete contrast to Lighthouse, you don't have to do the specific run to make money every single time that you play the map. You can make money literally doing whatever you do because the loot is just crazy everywhere. And so for PvE, this map is a must if you possibly can play it. Obviously, if you get like 20 frames per second, it's going to be a D tier map because you can't actually play the game. So hopefully BSG will try and optimize Streets even better than it currently is, because it's pretty garbage for most people. And so if they do that, it will for sure be an S tier map for absolutely everyone. So maybe we should drop it down to an A tier, but in terms of if you can play it and you are able to play it, it's an S tier for sure. So I'm going to leave it at S tier, but of course, you know, it depends on your own situation and the computer that you're running Tarkov on as to whether or not you can actually play the map. So then we come on to Woods. Now, Woods is a map that is pretty garbage in terms of the loot that you can get, in my opinion, from playing PvE. Because, once again, much like Shoreline, it's so big, it's so massive, and the loot density is very small in terms of the positions on the map. There's a lot of running that you have to do. The engagements are a lot larger than what you would normally see. So, in terms of like an enjoyable map to play, if you want to be a more marksman-orientated player, then it's a very, very fun map to do. And I enjoy going on and using a sniper, for example, to test it out and just enjoy playing the game for what it is and not going for loot, for example. But in addition to that, you've then got to run a long way if you want to get anywhere. And so this map is a bit of a headache for me, especially if I have tasks on the map where I'm forced to play, because it isn't one I enjoy. And I think from a standpoint of both loot, it's pretty bad and mediocre, and so I think it would definitely be another C tier. It has some enjoyable bosses that you can go and fight. You can fight the goons, as well as going and fighting Sturman if the PMCs don't already take him out, which is definitely a problem on Woods at the minute because of the changes that they made to the PMCs and bosses interacting with one another. And so the PMCs currently, as it is in the game, will just take out the boss as soon as they spawn there, basically. So it can be a bit of a headache if you have got tasks to specifically take out Sturman, for example, and Sturman doesn't have any body armor, so him tanking hits from PMCs just isn't really going to happen. And so yeah, it can be a real problem to complete the task, so you got to hope for a good spawn, otherwise it's just like, what a waste of a raid. So yeah, overall, it's an okay map. It's not bad, it's just not great for, you know, getting loot or just having a generally kind of engagement diverse map, if that makes sense. There's a lot of long-term engagements, and using a flare makes it a whole lot better, but yeah, not my favourite map at all. And then we move on to Ground Zero, the map that I'm pretty sure anyone that's played PvE absolutely hates. This map is a big pile of garbage on PVE. It is absolutely horrific to try and play because of the fact that you can spawn in and instantly get headshot by another PMC, which is always fun when you're trying to play a game that is supposed to be realistic. I've had instances where I've gone on to ground zero, and as I spawn in, my character is falling over and we have to go back into another raid. So that was always fun. The map itself is so difficult to actually play in terms of like how the AI react to you, because obviously PMCs have quite a big aggro range where they can aggressively attack you, and because there are, you know, 5 spawns, something like that, of PMCs on the map, if you're trying to push into the center area, there can be so many different directions that you're just getting lasered by. And although yes, you can counter it and you can play super safe, it does mean that the map, the way you have to play the map, becomes very boring, and you have to be very slow when you are moving up because there are so many different angles. And if the boss spawns, it's horrendous, literally horrendous, because of the fact that PMCs and the boss will aggro you rather than each other if you come into contact. And so if you want to make it slightly easier for yourself, I'd highly recommend just waiting for like the first 2 minutes of playing ground zero until the boss and potentially any PMCs actually interact with one another, and hopefully some of them actually get taken out. And you also have PMC on PMC action, and if that happens, it can be quite good because you can get rid of some of those PMCs and stuff like that. Whereas if you engage with a PMC and the boss also engages you, they don't target each other, they've got like priority on you, so that becomes a horrible situation. And so yeah, ground zero not really feeling like one of the best maps in the game. The loot is pretty good if you can get in and get out pretty quickly, but once again, the problem is to get to some of the extracts, you have to run through all of the high kind of danger areas, so you need to clear them before you can even run through. It's not like you can take a safer route. You can take safer routes, but they're not safe by any standards, and compared to some of the other maps in the game, they just definitely aren't safe. So yeah, it's one of those where I think ground zero needs some work with regards to the PMC aggro range on that specific map, because it is not fun for a lot of people. It's just not a map that I enjoy playing, and probably why I haven't played it a huge amount. You can still absolutely survive fine on the map. It's just you have to play in such a way that is just not engaging or fun for me. And yeah, compared to the loot that you can go and get on something like Reserve or Streets or Lab, it's okay. It's on the lower end side of those maps, but at the same time, it's such a hassle to even play that I think for me it's got to be D tier. Just the map layout and playing it on PvE doesn't seem to work very well at the moment, and hopefully that gets sorted, because the map itself is actually quite fun to play, but that's on PvP as opposed to PvE. So yeah, comparing both of those to actually playing it on PvE, it's just nowhere near the same. So yeah, definitely a PvP orientated map that I think would be much better if they changed how the PMCs actually work on ground zero. So then we move into Customs. Customs is a pretty fun map to play. It obviously gets the goons that spawn, and unlike something like Shoreline's goon spawn, which can be very, very difficult to deal with because they are on top of you, having an advantage on the high ground. If you watch Star Wars, I'm pretty sure you know what happens when someone has the high ground. So it just absolutely sucks when it comes to playing it on Shoreline compared to Customs. They're on flat ground. They are a much more predictable engagement type. They are pretty much sitting around Skelly, or they're, you know, sitting around the actual main fortress area and by Crack House as well. So wherever they are, you can deal with the goons pretty easily, as long as you kind of understand their mechanics and you've practiced a little bit. So it's nice to have them on there. They don't spawn all of the time, but they are quite a high spawn rate, so you got to be careful. PMCs on the map spawn in where you usually would expect them. You know, the Big Red, you've got them in the actual dorms, and the dorms engagements feel really cool. I really enjoy pushing into dorms. You have the dorms marked room key that you can go and loot up. Loot for Customs is probably on the lower end, like one of the least good maps, I guess. It's still okay, but the problem is like the loot density, the loot value of each of the items just not quite there. And there are some places where you can go and loot up and there's decent loot which you can get, and some things are actually very easy to go and get on customs that you can't really get for tasks on a lot of the other maps as easily. So it's a good map for certain tasks, but in terms of like going in purely for loot, it's not the best. But in terms of like the general layout of the map, I really enjoy the map as a whole, and I think it is quite fun. You have the Rashala as a boss, you've got the goons, and the PMCs spread out, and their kind of movement in the actual game feel really nice. So I think for me, it's not a great, excellent map, but for a map that is just there for fun and to complete tasks on, I do not hate the map at all. So I think it is a solid map, and hence why it's in B tier. Loot on the low end, enjoyment on a high end, so coming out as kind of a B tier is probably where it's at. Now, next we have Factory, and Factory for me is a really enjoyable map. Like, it is super fun since they changed the whole Factory map from what it used to be. On PvE, it feels amazing to play. Like, it is one of the best maps for me in terms of enjoyment. You can essentially have all kinds of different engagements. There's a very good chance that you can test out all of your different weapons successfully. It's quite a predictable map, but equally there's also some surprises that can come around. And so Factory, it is kind of one of those maps which I feel like a lot of people love to try out, love to test out different weapons, different loadouts, and it works really well. And since the changes that they did make, the actual loot on Factory feels pretty good now for the time that you're spending in it. In terms of taking out PMCs on Factory, the extracts are so close to the point where you can take out like 5 PMCs in the map and just extract straight away, and the loot that you can get off of them in the time period that you spend in the raid is pretty good. So although, you know, you're not spending 20 minutes in the raid going around and looting up loads of places and taking out 3 million plus per raid, you might spend a third of the time and make 800k compared to something like the lab where maybe you make 3 million in like 20-30 minutes of actually playing. And so Factory is just a very, very fun map. There's lots more places to explore now. There's a lot of corridors. Of course, you have Tagilla that can come out of nowhere and try and bean your head in. So yeah, it works really well. And I find the map to be quite a fun one. So once again, I'd highly recommend at least testing out Factory as a map. And the amount of loot is pretty good for the size of the map. And yeah, in terms of where it's positioned, I think, being realistic, it's probably a B tier map, if not an A tier map, borderline between the two. And so yeah, a pretty decent, good map overall, and dependent on what your intention is to whether you want to test something out, try something out, get a little bit of loot, get some action against some PMCs, quick action, trying to train yourself, that is where it would be pushed up to like an A tier. In terms of loot per minute that you're spending in the raid, probably like a C tier map or B tier, so hence why we put it in the B tier. And then finally we have Interchange. Now this is a map that is amazing for loot once again, but it does require you to have quite a few keys if you want to make use of the map to like the fullest extent, much like labs. But once you do get those keys, they're not too expensive where you're spending like 5 million for a key, for example, but they are expensive. And once you do get the map and you kind of knuckle down and learn the map, it can be one of the best and kind of most loot dense maps where you can just go in and whatever route you're taking to get into the center of Interchange, it will just give you lots of loot that you can take out of the raid. Now, it does have one of the more annoying bosses to try and take out, which is Killer. And so, much like Tagilla, he's wearing, you know, the level 5 plates, etc., level 6 plates, depending on what armor. And so, yeah, it can be a bit of a pain to take him out, especially as a new player. But as you kind of get through the levels, you're unlocking the best ammo in the game. You can pretty much deal with him quite easily. But once again, unpredictable. The map can be quite dark in certain places, and trying to spot him when he's rolling around somewhere, yeah, can be a bit annoying. And most often than not, you're going to find him just randomly surprise you, and yeah, you're going to have to deal with it pretty quickly if you want to take him out. But that leads to some really cool engagements, and I've really enjoyed the map as a whole. The only problem with PvE specifically, which is the issue with the map itself, is the infinite scav spawns. Now, this map is notorious on PvE for just basically just printing out scavs every single time, which means when you are engaging the PMCs and the boss, you'll have a good engagement. It's really good. The loot you can go and loot up is really good, but in between you looting, there is just like 5 scavs that spawn every like minute, which means you're having to constantly take out scavs. And they're not difficult to take out, but it becomes annoying to the point where like you can't even loot one of the PMCs before an army of scavs arrive at you, and they just keep on spawning and spawning and spawning. So in terms of XP and how much XP you can get on the map, it's probably up there with like some of the best map in the game because of the fact there's so many scavs spawning. And if you're getting the headshot multipliers for taking them out over time, you're going to get, you know, 20k XP, 30k XP if you take out like 50 scavs, but it can literally be 50 scavs in a singular raid, and that is the problem with Interchange on PvE. The scav spawns are crazy, and because you're a solo player, you're having to deal with all of those scavs on your own, as opposed to on a PvP server, which the spawn rate of scavs is probably the same, but there's a lot more players taking out those scavs, and although the PMCs and the scavs do engage each other, because they typically will push into the center of the map, they'll actually prioritize other PMCs over taking out scavs, which then means that you're having to then take out scavs and PMCs, and of course they'll then prioritize you, and the boss can spawn. So it's a great map for a lot of different spawns. You know, your tech items, there's tons of spawns for example, graphics card, there's Bitcoin spawns, there's LEDX spawns, there's loads of medical areas which you can go and loot up. There is, of course, extracts that are very good. You got the car extract, which also has some decent loot that's next to it, and so you can go and loot up just before you leave the raid. And so I think the map works really well. It's a fun, engaging map, but is it the best? Is it top 3 in the game? I don't think so, because of the issues with those scavs. It's just an annoying map sometimes. And so if they solve the scav issue where they're just endless waves of constant scavs over and over and over again, which gets exciting the first time you do it, but when you're 5 raids, 10 raids deep into Interchange, and there are just armies of scavs just annoying you every single time you're trying to loot or complete a task, it gets boring very quickly. And so for me, that's why it's probably like a B tier. But in terms of why I don't really like playing the map, it's because of that issue. And if that was solved, it would be a solid like B, A tier map. But for me, in terms of PvE, how it works, how annoying it is to play the map, it's a C tier, and it's unfortunate because of that fact. And if they were to solve how many scavs actually spawn when you have only one of you in the raid, if there's groups of you, you know, you're going in with mates, it's much easier because, you know, you're sharing all of the scavs between you. But as a solo player, if you're playing it, it definitely sucks because of that reason. So C, B tier, it's very close in terms of where I put it. If it was solved, I think it would be A or B tier in terms of how it actually plays. So yeah, so far C tier. So overall, that is my entire tier list that I personally think of all of the different maps in the game. Whether it's loot, whether it's enjoyable kind of fun engagements that you can have in the game. And hopefully you leave your own comments. What would you do to the tier list? What would you change? Of course, this isn't saying that this is the best thing in the world or these are exactly what I would do. This is just my experience of playing Tarkov for probably a lot more time than I should have. But yeah, hopefully you leave those comments in the comment section down below. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it. And yeah, give me any feedback which you have about the tier list, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.